Welcome to Women Entrepreneurs Radio with your host, Deborah Bailey. When I started this podcast in 2008, I was on a mission to promote women business owners, creatives, and entrepreneurs. In each episode, my guests provide resources, valuable tips, and inspiration. Women Entrepreneurs Radio is about showing women how to harness their natural strength to achieve success on their own terms. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Women Entrepreneurs Radio with your host, Deborah Bailey, and I'm so glad that you could join us today. And I'm going to introduce my guest, Angela Ficken. She's a full-time psychotherapist in private practice. She specializes in OCD, eating disorders, and anxiety-related concerns. And she started her career at McLean Hospital, which is one of the top-ranking psychiatric hospitals in the country, as affiliated with Harvard University. She was the head social worker on an inpatient unit that focuses on anxiety and depression. So we're going to be talking a lot more about those things and definitely things that we should know and hopefully will help all of you. So welcome to the show, Angela.
Thank you so much, Deborah. I'm so excited to be here.
So before we get started to talk more about the topic at hand, could you please share how you got started in the work that you're doing?
So I had a calling at a very young age of 10, actually. I was in therapy as a kid. My parents were very supportive of that. I was really struggling at that point with my parents had been divorced for years. My dad was dating and thinking about getting married. My mom started dating. I was just really having a very difficult time. And Dr. Thorbeck, my therapist at the time, I just loved her. I loved how she held all my feelings. She wasn't my parent and I could tell her everything. And she was just a really safe space. And she also, I saw her in her house. She had a really beautiful house with a really nice office. And I thought, I want to do this. This feels really good. And since that, honestly, at that point, I mean, I thought about different career choices as I grew up, but I always went back to psychology and helping people. And that was just where I first got my kind of hook. And then in undergrad, majored in psychology and started kind of doing that work. And through my jobs and my career just kind of blossomed and kind of grew into it. But that's kind of where I got my start as a young kid, and then was really raised at McLean Hospital, which you mentioned earlier, kind of where I got my start. I started at the OCD Institute, Obsessive Compulsive Disorder Institute, right out of undergrad, and learned a ton from some of the best people on the planet on OCD, and then came back years later once I got my master's in social work at the adult inpatient unit for depression and anxiety at McLean, and then just kind of took off from there. But that, I think being 10 and needing help and getting help and feeling really held by somebody was really special. And I think that's kind of the space that I want to recreate for anyone who comes to see me now virtually, but I try to create that same space.
Well, I guess it may be an understatement to even ask if you feel that you're seeing more of an increase in people who are seeking out therapy right now. I think particularly for stress disorder and anxiety and all these things. What are you seeing an increase?
It's been pretty steady. I mean, I think since COVID, what I can say is that the convenience of going to therapy has been really helpful in the virtual setting. People don't have to run on their lunch break and then speed walk after session to get back to it, or trying to make arrangements for childcare in the same way. So I think now people have a greater access because virtual just allows different hours, right?
Mhm.
And it cuts down on the commute. So I think more people are coming in and trying it out. And that, yeah, like over the past 3 or 4 years have definitely seen an increase, not just in terms of people now having the time, but all that stress in terms of what the pandemic did. And now
Mhm.
kind of going back to people trying to toggle between hybrid or all in or all out, kind of, and, trying to rebuild a social life, a sense of community, all of that kind of got imploded, so to speak. And a
Mhm.
lot of people are trying to rebuild. So I definitely have seen how the past few years in particular have increased for people. And
Mhm.
that again, I think the virtual aspect has been very helpful in giving
Mhm.
people more opportunity to reach out.
Mhm. Well, that's true. Yeah, a lot of changes definitely came out of the pandemic. And as far as, stress, managing stress, it always seemed, I think, maybe pre-COVID, that a lot of times people sometimes took stress as something that either, I don't know if the right word is that they ignored it, but maybe they just accepted that it was just part of fast-paced life, or if you're, particularly if you're, maybe in a job that's very demanding, or home life and all that, that people really, I think, or feel that they kind of figure, well, that's part of what has to happen. Um, do you feel that now that people are willing to really look at ways that they can make these changes in their life and not just accept that, they're stressed out?
Yeah, I think that there's definitely more. I think it's out there more, right? People talking
Mm,
more about being in therapy, and sharing with their colleagues. Again, every, job culture is different, but I do hear people that come to see me that they're talking with their friends about therapy more. They're talking with their family. It's definitely out more, which is wonderful. And I think people
mhm,
in high powered jobs, high stress jobs, there's a sense of like you thrive in stress, like
mm,
you're choosing the field for a reason.
mhm,
Part of
mhm,
that is probably some creativity, right? So in the entrepreneur world, it's startup world, there's some excitement about being creative.
mhm,
And with that comes uncharted kind of territory, or kind of throwing a lot of stuff at the wall and seeing what sticks. It can be really exciting and stressful. And the reason why people who are kind of in that world gravitate to that world is because there's a sense of kind of good stress. They're
mhm,
thriving in kind of the wheels are burning at all hours.
mhm,
And what can happen is that there's a tipping point, right? There's things that can
mhm,
happen where uh, either outside of work or in work, where certain stressors are too much. And that's when having the right skills can be so beneficial. You can be such a master at handling certain stress,
mhm,
going into a meeting and speaking to 5,000 people, going in and meeting with investors and pitching your new business. Like that is inherently stressful, and you're doing it
mhm,
probably because you're very good at it. But it's still stress. And then on the
mhm,
other hand, kind of the bad stress is where a lot of us kind of start to trip over our own feet in terms of like, well, I'm really good at this. Why can't I just manage this other part of my life that is now
mhm.
stressful? And that's when it gets tricky for people, which is why they come to hopefully see me or I can try to be helpful, right? Yeah.
Well, that's true. They definitely can seek out someone to help them.
Yeah.
And I think the start, as we're talking about the pandemic, that added, layers of stress to people that they didn't probably maybe have never dealt with before. When people are going through, I guess maybe getting back into, let's say, the workplace, of course, with people being able to work from home, and some are being called back and they don't want to go. Um, what are some ways people can manage these changes? Because these are things I don't think we've never dealt with. Not that there haven't ever been pandemics, but we've never dealt with this. What are some ways do you think we can cope with these changes that we're probably still trying to understand?
Yeah, especially kind of trying to figure out, I think more companies are trying to figure out, how frequently people go back, who wants to go back. And just that people are in many different camps, right? Some are all in for going back full time. Other people absolutely do not want to go back to the office. And then, of course, there's everybody in the middle. So there are, we all kind of lie on this continuum. But I think in terms of managing stress, and if it's in particular kind of looking at work or kind of what your next step might be or how to manage that uncertainty, is thinking about slivers, not chunks, right? So when we think about our day or week or our 5 years down the road, if it starts to feel overwhelming, I try to think about, instead of chunking it out, which can create panic, which is like uncertain what's going to happen next, when, who, where, why, how, slivering it down and thinking about what are the tasks that I can get done today, what is on my calendar for the week, and kind of building that structure and having something to focus on can be helpful in just managing and having that and managing stress, and then seeing what is in front of us also gives us a sense of certainty. I know what's happening today, and that's as far as I can take it. And so that can really help kind of circle our own corral, so to speak, in a way that can help manage stress and anxiety. And the other is if people are really having a shift in thinking of like, is this really what I want to do, right? Do I really want to go back full time to an office? Sometimes it's worth reevaluating your values and what's important to you, which certainly the pandemic has kind of reevaluated values for many people. Some people want to be more close to their family. Some people have moved away to different parts of the country or the world because that really called to them. And they thought, I've got to do it now or never. So I think also just thinking through your top 5 values and prioritizing and thinking, does this, who I am and what I feel important, does this match what I'm doing? And maybe it doesn't hit all the boxes, but it also just gives you some space to really think about what's important to you rather than maybe the pushback of like, I just don't want to do it. This doesn't feel good. So it just helps give us a bit more clarity.
And, again, when it comes to work and maybe situations people aren't really ready to step back into, there's also the question again of the work-life balance that was always the big thing. I think before people were in mass working from home, that was always a thing. And as far as that, I mean, is there really a way that people can really get that balance? Are there really strategies that they can use for that?
But the balance is an interesting word. It's I always just picture kind of like a seesaw.
Yes.
And like, how do you get it perfect, right? And that's just, it's not going to happen. I mean, if somebody figures it out, write a book, make $1 billion, right? Right. I think it's just more, I try to think about a priority list, right? Or like I envision like a conveyor belt. And everything in my life is on that conveyor belt. I get to determine where I put it on that conveyor belt and how frequently I pick those items up. But when I pick whatever comes at me, the first thing I pick up, I look at it and I put it back somewhere on the conveyor belt and I know I'll see it again, right? So it's about priorities and preference. And each day that changes for me and for everybody. And I think having the priorities, our priorities known to us can help us get a sense of some balance and kind of whatever that means for people. For me on my conveyor belt today, it was seeing my patients. It was picking my daughter up from school, going for a walk, seeing my trainer virtually to lift some weights. and speaking with you. And then, I'll read books to my daughter later. Like those are my priorities. And I missed, I wasn't there at dinner, so I could prep for this. And that's what I wanted to do. And that was a priority. It doesn't mean she's bottom of the totem pole. It just means that things in my life all are on my conveyor belt, and I get to determine the order, and all the things that are special to me get touched. So I think that's how I tend to think about it, rather than I've got to find this perfect balance, because that just isn't going to happen. I don't think. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think it's a conversation that people have, but then, is it really possible the way that we're describing it, or is it just a way that people have to find what works for them and what their priorities are? And that's what it sounds like.
Yes, I think it's just about what is important to you, and though that gets to change every day. It just is like, what do you prefer and what's important to you? And I think holding those truths will help you over time just establish some sense of equilibrium within yourself.
And that makes sense. And I would think also, when you're doing all this, there also has to be the idea of setting some boundaries, which may also be a loaded topic for people.
Yeah. Yeah. If you could see me, I am smiling and somewhat giggling, because boundaries are so hard.
Yes.
And they are very important in managing stress. And it's hard at times to say no when you feel like you're trying to do it all and hustle and be it all. And that just can lead to burnout, resentment, and that's just at work. That doesn't even touch like family, friends, relationships. It's boundaries are really important to have, and they're really hard to set when you don't, you weren't raised in a family that's good at boundaries, or you didn't have good models that showed you boundaries. So you're out there kind of really for the first time in your 20s, 30s, or 40s or above, really just trying to how do I say no? And how do you know what your personal limits are, right? Because everyone has a different personal limit on all different topics. So yeah, boundaries are key.
Yeah, that's definitely something that is very challenging, to have, especially as you're saying, if it's something that you're not used to, or for whatever reason, it's not something that you were maybe brought up to use, or maybe thinking that you really didn't have a right to use them, or don't really understand what that is. Because saying no can be a very difficult thing to do. And I think, also in terms of, particularly women entrepreneurs who may take on a lot of different roles while they're managing, the business part, and then they've got the other parts of their lives, then it can be really easy to get to that point where they don't have a way, or don't know how to manage the things that are important to them. I've definitely seen that where, people put in all these hours, and then other things are not being done. And then of course that leads to more stress. What advice would you have for the person who's, just trying to keep it all going? Or is it really possible? Maybe they really do have to have the priorities as to what can and can't be done. What would you say?
Yeah, I mean, you're not superhuman, right?
Right.
I mean, something's got to give. So if you're, the superstar at work that you're saying yes to everything, chances are your personal life, or your, quality time with yourself is like zero, right? So your well is dry. So I think the boundaries of, that kind of a starter kit, what I would recommend is for people to really evaluate, where do you think you need to strengthen your boundaries, with whom, or, where, and then to think about what might help you get more space. It's like, you know what, I would really like to delegate more, but I just feel like I feel bad asking for help. And, I'm just so efficient. I'll just do it myself. Right. And taking on more work means, again, you're working longer hours. It can build resentment, and you're doing it to yourself. So I think it's just to pause and think, where are the holes or the gaps, or where you want to put up a boundary? Where are your personal limits? And you can kind of get a sense if you're feeling irritable, if you're feeling some resentment, if you're feeling really tired, if your internal dialogue is saying, I don't want to, and yes is coming out of your mouth, then that is another way to kind of pay attention to, like, that's probably where you would want to start to think about setting a boundary. And then think about some boundary statements. You don't have to explain your decisions. And a lot of people feel like they do. I'm really sorry. I really wish that I could, but I can't because so-and-so's in town. She's like, you know what? I would really love to. I can't this time. I'm going to have to pass. Right. Or just a simple, no, thank you. Or my plate's pretty full this week. If you want to assign me this task, help me figure out what other tasks I can kind of pause on so I can get this done, right? Rather than saying yes, and then you're trying to juggle all of these things. So I think the assessment up front will be helpful in really getting you some clarity on how you might need to kind of shore up your boundaries. And it's hard. It takes courage. It takes bravery. And you do hard things all the time. And I think this setting up your boundaries, when we actually say it, it feels really scary, but then when we do it, you can feel so good. And like, the world doesn't come to an end. Sure, people might feel disappointed and have feelings. It's okay for them to have feelings, but when you set that boundary, will get more brain space and more time for yourself and how you want to spend it. And you actually start to feel really good. So it's a great benefit. So I highly recommend thinking about your boundaries.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, because I think a lot of times people are afraid to say those things that they would have to say to, the person, or to, the situation, so they can not, take on something maybe that's too much or whatever is going on. Yeah, I think that's probably a big problem. I know it is for me and other people that I know. It's like, oh, I don't want to say that. I'll just go ahead and do it. And then, you're probably doing something more that is now taking up space from maybe something else you would have preferred, or something else you had to do. It just seems like it becomes like, something rolling down a hill. It just gets bigger and bigger and bigger.
It does. Yes. Yeah.
And then you're like, oh my God, if only I had just said no, or if only I maybe suggested another way to do this or something. Yeah, I could definitely see that very much from my own experience.
And I think, like, one of the strategies I use often is, I think about redo. So knowing what I know now, what would I do differently? So when there are moments where I steamrolled my own boundaries and said yes, I think, man, what could I have done differently? If what would have been a boundary statement for me? And then I just kind of replay it in my head. And that helps kind of in the mindfulness practice of, like, okay, next time the same things might not help in verbatim, but the next time my brain will be more likely to say, oh, you remember that time, Angela? Like, this is what you want to say. So I think redos, or knowing what I know now, what would I do differently, and being able to say it out loud or think through it really does help kind of shift those cognitive wires in our brain. So even if you flop through a boundary, it's okay. You just think about next time, right? And we learn by doing. So, you'll have plenty of practice. That's one guarantee I can give everybody. We have plenty of practice.
Well, that's true. There's always going to be something else that comes up.
That's right.
that you're going to have to deal with. So it's not just going to be a one-off that you have to say yes, or that you felt you had to say yes to something that you preferred not to do. And, also as far as a lot of people, of course, during the pandemic spoke of, maybe loneliness and depression. And, right now, again, maybe things aren't quite the way they were, but I, also get a sense of that's still a factor for a lot of people coming out of, probably the worst parts of the pandemic. Do you still see those as things that are still kind of reverberating?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Mhm.
I think it's been really tricky for people to kind of get back out there. I've had many people say, I forget how to socialize. Like I don't, the
Mhm.
small talk, people are getting really tired, kind of faster going out, and some social anxiety about doing it. People who weren't dating for a while, for example, kind of going out now. And of course, people were dating throughout, which had its own challenges and how to get to know people and navigating that. But I think just people who haven't done it in a while are starting to kind of get back out there, and those challenges in terms of like, how do I talk about myself, or how do I ask questions again, can be challenging. It's a bit rusty. So I think that's been difficult, and just the kind of loneliness factor. I mean, for me personally, I have felt lonely. I've got my husband, he's wonderful. My daughter, she's great. My mom is 5 minutes away. I love my mom, so that's a good thing. And since the pandemic, like I work from home now. So I'm not before I would walk to my office in the city. I would, bump into some colleagues. I'd see people in the coffee shop. I'd be around people, right? Maybe I'm not seeing friends every day, but I would be around people. And since then, since the pandemic, and even, we moved during COVID, a bit more isolating, and just like, I need to get a life. I have to work at it now. And for me, that's been taking more walks in the neighborhood. So I actually get to know some of my neighbors, and they're all different ages. So it's not like I'm, out meeting. There's, moms with 5-year-old kids, but, up and down the block, which would be fabulous, but that's not how it is. But I, talk with people. I joined a gym, and being out and just being with other people has been helpful in taking exercise classes. So there's different things to try if you're feeling lonely. And it's not so much about, and it can be connecting with friends. And of course, that's a significant piece, and it's so helpful. But I also think just getting out and being in the world and being around other people can really help the loneliness, the factor. So I've encouraged people who do work from home and have the ability, to go to a cafe and do some work there, to be around other people, or go to a library. And again, just be alone together can actually feel really nice and fill the tank in different ways. So it's about getting creative with that sense of feeling lonely or alone, and thinking outside the box, which I had to do because it doesn't come naturally. My husband is a hybrid at work, so he gets to go into the city a few days a week, and he has lunch with friends, and he goes out, and so he gets that social connection that has been completely lost for me. So I've had to find my way through, and it took a bit of time, but it's been helpful. So I share that, just that, even though I teach the stuff, and I do try to practice what I preach, but it can be really hard. And it's just noting and noticing what is happening, and then trying to think what might help fill that tank for you, and then seeing how that goes.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, though, because people have to just find, I guess, new ways to connect with others that they may not have really thought about before.
Yes.
Yeah, Because if you were always just going to work or wherever, and then suddenly you're not, you're not even thinking about being social necessarily. You're just doing it, so then we have to think about it. It's weird.
Yes. Yeah, it is. It's very strange. I'm like, wait, how do I get unlonely? Like, this is
right.
I can't just open my door and see my colleagues anymore.
Right.
I'm not down the street, or, my office used to be right above a coffee shop. It was great.
Mhm.
It's like, I just can't run down and see people. So it's been another way of getting creative, and I've had to, it's been trial and error. Like I tried many different things before I got on this, like, oh, this is how I'm going to get my like sound bites of socializing and being with people. And I'm much more on the kind of the introvert, extrovert kind of continuum. I'm more on the introvert. I think my husband would need way more than what fills my tank, but again, to each their own. But for me, it took a lot of figuring out to feel like, okay, this is a good rhythm that helps me feel like I can work from home, do my work, and have that social tank filled too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think again, that makes a lot of sense, that people have to really find what's the way for them to go and see what works, and not feel that they have to try to do what others are doing if that's not a fit for them. But, going forward, do you think that in terms of this, I guess, new way of working, let's call it, do you see that this is going to continue? Because it really has made a lot of changes throughout society, I think, more than we realize, until we start to.
It's really hard to think about going back, right?
Right.
Like fully like waving the magic wand almost. It's just like everybody's going back. I don't think, like, we know more now, right? We know that certain things work. We know that a lot of people can be more efficient working from home. People are happier. I mean, again, not everyone, it's the continuum, but my husband has shared with his colleagues that he likes that he got to see his daughter more, right? Rather than, she's in daycare and we're both at work, and then we come home, but now he gets to drop her off and pick her up, on the days that he's working from home. So it's just more of an opportunity for families to be together, or for people to be together. So, it will be hard to see if it really does go back fully. But I think on that continuum, people who really value wanting to be in the office can find companies and jobs that definitely do that. And same thing with, hybrid and all virtual. So it's really based on preference. And I think that's probably where it will be.
Yeah, that's true. And yeah, I really think that at first glance, it didn't, it seemed like, okay, some people are going back, or they're trying to get people enticed them to come back. But I think the more that we look at it, the more you see that these really are changes, and how, I think you're saying that earlier, how people are looking at their lives and looking at their work and making different decisions than they may have before. So there's a lot of ramifications here that we may not even realize just yet.
Yes. Yeah. It's, I think, still unfolding.
Definitely. So yeah, I can certainly tell that from the number of articles I see coming out about how people should go back to work because they'll be more efficient. It's like, I'm like, okay, who's ready?
Yes. Somebody who wants to go back to work and to the office is writing that one. Yes. Yeah.
I'm like, I'm hearing something different on the side. So
yeah.
I don't think they're ready for this change, what the established order, however you want to describe it. I don't think they're quite knowing what to do with this.
Yeah, it's complicated because you're just dealing with so many different people's preferences. It's like the companies are trying to make everyone happy, and you can't.
Right.
So that's also, it's just tricky.
Right.
Yeah.
That's true. And I think the good thing is that people are seeing that maybe, they can find a way for themselves and not necessarily fall into, some of the traps that they may have been in before. Because, when I was in IT, it was pretty much almost a badge of honor to be working long hours. And after a while, you're accepting that and you're not thinking about, well, what about the rest of my life or other things I want to do? You just kind of naturally put them aside.
Yeah, it's the culture or the expectation of what you do. Everyone's doing it. You kind of get into that fold, and it's hard to kind of course correct if that's what you're wanting to do.
Right. Yeah, because it can get very stressful if people feel that they are not going in the direction they want to, but feel that they can't say anything because everybody else is doing it. But that's kind of, changed up right now. So, we'll see how that all works out. But Angela, could you please share where the listeners can find out more about you?
Sure. So if you're interested in learning more about me, your listeners can go to my website, worriedtowellbalanced.com. And on there, you can learn more about me and my practice. And then all the kind of online products I have are on there as well in terms of different packages I have. I have a stress management course on there, which is soup to nuts, like everything that I know about stress management and the skills I teach are in that course that I wrote. And there's a lot more on there if you're interested. So worriedtowellbalanced.com.
Great. Well, did you want to share anything more about your course or?
So, well, with my course, the reason why I wrote it is that a lot of people who were finding me in Boston, where I'm located, and Boston is it's not a big city. You can walk all the important parts in a day. But people were finding me were saying that the skills and strategies I was teaching them was helpful, which is great, but that I was apparently a hard find. The therapy I do is pretty specialized. It's cognitive behavioral therapy. It's thinking and changing negative internal dialogue, and a few other behavioral strategies. And so I thought, well, if they're having a hard time finding me, then maybe other people are having a hard time finding me. So what if I just wrote a course on stress management, and that no matter where you are in the world, you can learn the skills that I teach in my sessions. And so that's what prompted me to write it. It's called Slivers, Not Chunks, which I mentioned earlier. I really am a believer in slivering things out to manage those feelings of stress and anxiety. And it's 7 modules of basically everything I know is in there. It's like my mini dissertation in stress management.
Yeah, that sounds terrific. Because, these are definitely things that we have to really learn how to manage better, I think, as individuals, because there's always going to be stressors and such. So, we really have to learn how to, do this in a healthy way so that we can really have a better quality of life, which is, again, something I learned once I came out of IT. And you just feel like, wow, what happened?
Yes.
You have to try to learn how to, function when you're not always at work or thinking about work or, cutting everything else out of your life. It really was a change and for me coming out of that. So I can totally understand how it could be to be on that treadmill and then you may want to come off, or you are in the process, but not really knowing how to function after that.
Yes, it can be. It can be very confusing, or just, again, the reevaluating. Where do you go, especially when you're faced with so much contrast? You know what you don't want, or you don't want this, but you don't know how to get off. It can be it can feel pretty complicated.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think so. Once you've, been so focused on that for a long time, and then it's like, okay, this isn't the way I want to continue. So what are some good things that I can do going forward? So I think that sounds like your course would be a wonderful thing for people to look into, so they can really clear out all that all those feelings and see how they can be better and feel better. So Angela, I know that we're coming to the end of our conversation, and I just want to ask if you have any final thoughts you'd like to share.
Well, thank you so much for having me. This was a lot of fun. And I think just the final share is that we're all a work in progress, right? Our work is never done. And to have some self-compassion and give yourself some grace, that if you're feeling stressed or burnt out, or you're feeling that things are brewing, to think about just being self-compassionate with yourself, to try to think about slowing it down, and that it's not perfect. It's not about getting it perfect. It's just trying to take care of yourself and tend to yourself in the best way that you can, day by day. So I would encourage people to kind of remember that as you go on your stress management journey, that it's all a process all the time.
And that's perfect. That's perfect. And that's definitely how it feels. So that's great to hear. I feel like that means I'm on the right track. Good.
Yes, you are. Yes.
That's good to hear. So I really enjoyed our conversation. I know this is a huge topic, but we've only got a certain amount of time to cover it. But I want to thank you so much for making the time to come and speak with me today. It's been wonderful.
Absolutely, Deborah. Thank you so much.
Okay, everyone, I know you enjoyed our conversation. Please share this with your friends, share it on social media, and make sure to check out Angela's site for all the different resources that she has available. So once again, it's been Women Entrepreneurs Radio with your host, Deborah Bailey. I thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you again next time. Bye-bye.